Given the fact that Anne Frank's widespread fame, both in the US and elsewhere, was to a large extent based on the popular and creative adaptation of her diary and a successful theatre play on Broadway in 1955, as well as in the 1959 Hollywood movie, The Diary of Anne Frank, it is remarkable that comics, by then a clearly less established popular medium, were regarded as unsuitable for transferring this message. Such a hesitation was absent from a nearby country like Mexico, where the Second World War and the Holocaust were considered distant phenomena, but where comics were as popular as in the United States. Against that background, it was less complicated to publish comics devoted to Anne's life. Between 1963 and 1972, no less than 3 Mexican publishers thought Anne Frank to be an interesting topic for their biographical comic book series. Like many of these popular pulp comics, often created by anonymous artists, they were a mixture of an educational publication and an entertainment product. Anne Frank's personal experiences were presented as an exemplary life, like the saints and other inspirational Christians whose lives were presented in religious publications in Mexico for a wide audience. In fact, in the series Mujeres Celebradas, on celebrated women, the Jewish Anne was placed in an environment that had certain Catholic characteristics, like the painting of the Holy Virgin in Anne's hiding place, which you can see below on the left. And you can also see that the author mistakenly thought she was living in the basement instead of an attic. The publication of these 3 comics was partly the result of the Mexican fascination with good and evil, and of the popularity of various Second World War themes, even though it was considered to be mainly a European affair. At the same time, the large production of Mexican comics simply seemed to run out of suitable topics for new comic books. Yet, instead of reprinting or even plagiarizing, pirating the first Mexican Anne Frank comic, new comics were made. Undoubtedly, they were all inspired by the US movie and theater play, but not so much by the previous comic book portrayals from within Mexico. The next Anne Frank comic appeared in Asia around 1973. This Filipino edition of the Diary of Anne Frank by Rodolfo Lofamia was framed in an American way of presenting. The US concept of Classics Illustrated had already reached the Philippines in the late 1940s, where it was adapted to meet local needs and tastes under the name National Classic Illustrated. The Anne Frank comic in this series strongly creates the impression of a romantic story with characters dressed up in fashionable post-war clothing. Even though the Second World War was part of the national history of the Philippines, the Holocaust here remained a faraway phenomenon. In that way, this comic became a somewhat ahistorical narrative, based on cliché stories about an impossible love under difficult circumstances. The result was a comic that was less educational than entertaining. Despite the increasing number of translations of the diary in written form, only 1 Anne Frank comic was published in the 1980s. Unfortunately, I don't have a picture of it. In the beginning of this decade, the first European Anne Frank comic appeared in Italy. In a Christian-inspired collection of pacifistic biographical sketches of famous people, Anne Frank was presented among Martin Luther King and Gandhi. This idealistic and educational framing differed from rather entertaining aim of 2 more Anne Frank comics that had also appeared in Mexico from 1991 onwards. From then on, Anne Frank also made a threefold appearance in Japan. The first Anne Frank manga, titled, if it's translated correctly, The Girl Who Lives Forever in the Hearts of Peace-Loving People, was published in 1992. The title alone suggests a kind of pacifism that reminds of the Italian Anne Frank comic that was published in that other former Axis country. The rather important role Anne Frank played in the Japanese perception of World War II, partly due to a positive and pacifistic outlook, was also underlined in a manga-style world history textbook devoted to World War II and Hitler the dictator. Her appearance on the front cover and elsewhere in the book as the only ordinary citizen among war leaders like Hitler, Stalin, and Churchill, emphasizes not only her appealing qualities as an individual, symbolizing human cast of man-made atrocities, but also explains to the reader that the Holocaust, even from an Asian perspective, was not just a detail in the history of this global war. Any hesitation on illustrating the Holocaust with a comic book character was absent in this Japanese context. The strong educational aim of this book is as obvious as the so-called Edu Manga, a manga-style publication by Tezuka Production that appeared in 2001. You can see it here below on the left. In this book, Astro Boy shows up from time to time to help young readers to understand Anne Frank's experiences. When this Atomo Poketo was published in an American edition in 2006, the success of this book was rather modest, despite Tezuka's increasingly appealing status on the American comics market. The combination of a fictional superhero with a historical character connected to such a painful, still very prominent episode may explain its limited popularity. Different from the situation in the early 1960s, and more than a decade after Spiegelman's groundbreaking graphic novels, the problem doesn't primarily seem to be that comics aren't considered suitable for representing the Holocaust, but simply that the reality of the Holocaust is not to be mixed with characters from a fiction's background.